Yeah, and I'm asked that a lot, and obviously it's important because of the big fines it carries with it, and obviously that generates lots of attention. But I think what it will do is it will raise the privacy awareness in the general population. And organisations need to be aware that people will be questioning how organisations handle their personal data. So going forwards, organisations need to understand that and recognise they need to manage and keep that information secure. They need to understand that groups out there may use it to their advantage. So activists or particular campaign groups that have an axe to grind against an organisation may decide to actually put subject access requests in, may decide to ask for their data to be removed or to be transferred. And so it's really important from that perspective to get that part of it right. So I've been involved in data privacy for the last 22 years. I passionately believe that if I give my personal information over to an organisation, they should trust it with respect that I would expect them to do that. I've taken them, willing to share it with them. I expect them in return to look after it. For far too long now, organisations have got away with poor data privacy practices. The fines have been relatively low. Okay, the fines are now high, but some of the other things associated around it in terms of reputational damage are much greater. And therefore I'm really pleased to see this regulation is taking it seriously. And organisations are now taking it seriously right up to the board level to say this is an important aspect for us to continue to consider as a business, to really respect the rights of those people who want to have trusted relationships. And really it's good to see that actually it's now giving some teeth to actually the regulators to go after those people that really abuse our privacy rights and regulations and abuse the personal information which we share with certain organisations. Certainly in terms of GDPR, it's all about having good, strong relationships with those people you most want to have those relationships with, your customers, your stakeholders and your employees. So it's really important in terms of the GDPR to make sure that you've communicated why that relationship is important to you, that you've assured people why you will keep their personal information safe, and to explain how, if you retain that information, how you can exploit it for the benefit of those customers, stakeholders and employees. So I think that's a key opportunity for organisations to look at the business opportunities around this and not necessarily just see the compliance downsides of GDPR. In particular, there is a challenger bank I spoke to recently, and obviously they're new entrants into the financial services market, and they're really embracing this. They're creating basically a privacy type app that they can give to their customers that allows them to actually change, almost a little bit like an iPhone in terms of slider bars, and able to switch off privacy by certain areas of information and how it will be used. They've really taken the level of consent down to a level of granularity, which really helps that challenger bank offer new services and opportunities to its clients, but at the same time puts it back in the power of the customer. It's a really innovative way of doing it, and they see that as a sort of a market. As they're entering into the market, a competitive advantage to get ahead of some of the traditional banks that are already in place and are struggling to find it difficult to actually put consent models in place, which really make it easy for users to actually interact with. First and foremost, it's actually trying to find out where that information is within the enterprise. It could be widely spread across large organisations, very difficult to try and find in many different formats. But not only that, it's obviously thinking about where it sits in the supply chain, because obviously your suppliers, along with yourselves, are jointly liable in terms of personal information you hold and process. And so it's thinking about those current suppliers you have, how they hold that information, but also importantly, all the legacy as well that's gone in the past. So often organisations will retain lots of information and not realise they have it. So a real key thing around it. I think another area to think about is actually in terms of looking at regulations. So those in regulated sectors usually have a whole raft of regulations they have to adhere to around information. Some of it touches personal information. With GDPR, you have obligations to delete data if you are requested to do so by a subject request. But of course, you need to make sure you're not falling foul of regulations, and so a lot of organisations we work with are challenged by trying to balance those regulatory requirements around that. And then finally, I think the final thing for me is around thinking about your business processes and making sure that by the deletion of personal information, you're not compromising the effectiveness of those business processes. So for example, if you use information on profiles of people, their history or backgrounds, if they're asking for that information to be deleted, you have a right to be forgotten. The question is, does that impact on your business process and effectiveness going forwards? The first thing I would say was don't panic. There's still plenty of time until the regulation comes into force. I would say look at it on a risk-based approach. Where are those key areas where you hold personal sensitive information? prioritise those, understand what consent you've had around those, and if you need to, look at how you capture that consent. Second thing I would suggest is obviously to look at your third-party supplier contracts. We're certainly experiencing at the moment a number of organisations which are struggling with those third-party providers, especially when they're overseas as well. So although they're jointly liable, they may not feel the same obligation because they don't sit within the European Union that the regulation may apply to them. So organisations are really struggling with their commercial relationships and contractual relationships with third-party suppliers. So I'd say really look at that quickly, understand exactly what those terms are, and negotiate now, nice and early, in terms of what you require to actually be done around the change of those contracts, because that can be quite a lengthy process. And the third thing I would suggest is communication. And communication, obviously important to actually communicate internally with your staff and your stake within your organisation, because they can be absolutely fundamental in making sure you don't get a GDPR breach. It's not all about technology, but also communicate to the clients and customers you have to explain to them how you're taking GDPR seriously, what measures you're putting in place, just to help them, encourage them to actually want to share and opt in and to give their approval to use their personal information.